Hi, welcome back to our business ethics class. So today we'll start with talking about feminist ethics. So what is feminist ethics? So feminist ethics aims to analyze, criticize, and rectify how gender functions within moral beliefs and ethical theories. Feminist ethics has three main targets, so challenging the binary understanding of gender, addressing historical privileges accorded to men, and examining how gender perspectives contribute to oppressive social structures, particularly affecting girls and women. So, feminist ethics emphasize the need to understand the experiences of individuals oppressed in gendered ways, often incorporating empirical information and material realities into their analysis. While some feminist ethicists have challenged specific aspects of the gender binary, others have focused on critiquing the historical privileging of men or opposing oppressive social orders based on gender. More recently, feminist ethicists have questioned the very concept of a fixed gender binary, arguing that it reinforces oppressive social structures, especially when it marginalizes those who do not conform to traditional gender norms. Feminist ethics also consider intersections of identities such as race, class, and disability alongside gender, critique assumptions about uniform male privilege. Instead, they direct attention to oppressive practices that harm individuals at these intersections, aiming to recognize the diverse experiences of women within marginalized groups. Emphasizing power, privilege, and limited access to social goods. So there is a fundamentally political nature of feminist ethics, and there are some connections to the Marxist ethics, which we will talk about in a bit as well. So we have to recognize that feminist ethics is not limited to specific ethical branches, but rather is a comprehensive approach aimed at improving ethical theorizing across various domains. The ultimate goal is to bring about positive changes in ethics by offering better perspectives and solutions, extending beyond gender-related issues to encompass broader moral experiences and the intersections of oppression. It's important to notice that feminist ethics is not one theory. There's lots of diversity among feminist ethicists regarding the themes and focuses they work with, and the theories within the field also has evolved a lot over the past 50 years. So I'll also talk about the themes in feminist ethics. The first theme I want to talk about is gender binarism, essentialism, and separatism. One key area of inquiry of feminist ethics is the exploration of meaningful differences in feminine and masculine priorities of care and justice in normative theory. So, within feminist ethics, there is a particular emphasis on issues related to gender binarism, essentialism, and separatism. So, in the 1970s and 1980s, gender binarism, the view that there are only two genders, male and female, was assumed by most feminist ethicists. Some criticized male supremacy, but they didn't try to establish female supremacy, arguing for a common morality for both genders. However, radical feminists and lesbian feminists presented alternative views, supporting either essentialism or women's separation from men. So Mary Daly, for instance, argued for embracing qualities traditionally ascribed to women as essential to women's nature. So I want to highlight there is a disagreement among feminist ethicists, with some supporting separatism to create alternative ethics and foster women's connections, while others like Alison Jagger argue for a culture that values the best elements of both genders. So the criticism of gender binarism includes its generalization of non-conforming individuals. Some feminists argue for a beyond the binary approach, promoting a coalition between trans activists and non-trans feminists. However, caution is advised against unintentionally invalidating trans identities, emphasizing the need to recognize the complex interconnection of gender norms with racist and sexist oppression. So, I guess overall, we have to recognize that the diverse perspectives within feminist ethics and start asking critical questions about gender, morality, and social structures. The next thing I want to talk about is queer ethics. We'll talk more about it if we have time. So, Jagger argues against separatism and separate gender realities, challenging the belief in a sexual polarity transcending physiological distinctions. So, the work of psychologist Carol Gilligan, particularly her book In a Different Voice, is very influential. So Gilligan challenges existing accounts of moral development, emphasizing girls' moral experiences, and argue against Lawrence Kohlberg's prioritization of a morality of rights over a morality of responsibility and intimate relationships. So Gilligan's research suggests that boys and men often value autonomy, rights, and independence, following the perspective of justice, while girls and women express both the perspective of justice and a perspective of care, emphasizing intimacy, responsibility, and relationships. Some philosophers like Neil Noddings argue for the moral preferability of a queer perspective, endorsing prioritizing interpersonal relationships over abstract universal principles. Others like Virginia Held and Joe Tronto extend the queer perspective to social and political contexts, advocating for better societies and treatment of distant others. However, the ethics of queer has faced critiques as well, and it has faced criticism within feminist ethics. So some argue that queer ethics reinforces the burdened history of females being associated with caregiving and may lead to moral damage to women's agency. Concerns include whether an unidirectional one-way caring enables the exploitation of caregivers, whether it excludes responsibilities to strangers, and whether it ignores political realities. It also can be problematic if we try to generalize this idea of women prioritizing caring. So it's been argued that we should recognize the fact that different women could believe and prioritize different things and values, and they should have pluralism of women's voices. I also want to talk about the intersection of approach to addressing the potential tension between conceptions of feminism and philosophers use intersectionality to question frequently is being discussed, arguing against notions that feminism is inherently passive, genital, obedient, emotional, independent, especially when contrasted with the conception of masculinity. The feminist ethics takes hold and approach to intersectionality to dive to the depth primary views such as masculinity versus femininity, emphasizing that identities are not racially unmarked, and there is no universal definition of femininity applying to all women. So scholars drawing from Black feminism, critical race theory, queer theory, and other fields argue that the conception of feminism can be wide, ableist, and cisgender, ignoring or denying the experiences of individuals whose identities intersect in various ways. So, Kimberly those living at intersections of oppression as a problem. It points out the ignorance of Black women's experiences and challenges the idea that discrimination occurs only along one axis of identity. However, intersectionality as an approach is also criticized. Some argue that it may not help with attempts to advocate for women because we are multiplying axes of analysis here. Others could respond by saying that everyday concepts like women encompass a range of identities, and the focus should be on working in coalitions that recognize and appreciate differences. To justify intersectionality, some feminist ethicists ask for clarifications and elaborations of details in intersectional theory. They try to acknowledge tensions happening at the intersections and seek a broader understanding that appreciates diverse practitioners. We will be able to observe that there is a shared interest among feminist ethicists, that they try to challenge other ethical theories. Feminist ethicists think lots of ethical theories frequently overlook or dismiss things, especially when it comes to generic truths or gender-specific descriptions of human nature. So some feminist ethicists support the ontological moral theories advocating for equal rights for women to enable freedom and flourishing. Feminists argue for rights in various issues such as enfranchisement, reproduction, abortion, bodily integrity, sexuality, sexual harassment, violence against women, and more. Criticisms to this group of feminist ethicists include the claim that the ontological frameworks can be absolutist and universal, prioritizing principles over contextual considerations. And some feminist ethicists may not like this. They think that we should see persons with specific contexts and understand the diverse lived experience, information, and features of that specific individual. We should not assume that all people's lived experiences and contexts are diverse. Some feminist ethicists argue that utilitarianism ignores qualitatively problematic nature of oppressions that are not reducible to harms. Maybe someone's discrimination towards me didn't produce any actual harm to me. Does it make it less problematic? Also, many philosophers of care ethics, ecofeminism, and environmental ethics don't like the requirements of impartiality. So I'll not explain their arguments in detail here. So some feminist ethicists also advocate for contractarian ethics, the view that moral norms derive their normative force from the idea of contract or mutual agreement. Some feminist ethicists argue that this approach allows us to critically evaluate our relationships, especially oppressive family relationships. Contractarianism is a tool to evaluate our preferences unconsciously formed in response to oppression. Some preferences may only be internalization of oppression, so women may be forming their preferences within the coercive and deforming space that patriarchy provides. If we think about the processes of how we form social contracts, we could study this process of social contract formation, for instance, Rawls' theory of justice and legitimacy, and try to work out the conditions of autonomous choice, independence, and dialogical reflection, and thus exposes preferences that fail to meet the conditions of autonomy. In the actual non-ideal conditions, dominant perspectives and oppressive social arrangements can make us come to prefer things that we could not otherwise prefer, and the preferences may not be for our own good, or could even lead to further oppression. What I think I prefer and want to choose may just be my unconscious coping mechanism to survive in oppression, and what I think I prefer and want to choose could just be that. So I could be reinforcing the injustice by believing that this is what I want to choose. Also, we are assuming here that all people can meaningfully consent to contracts, but we are excluding lots of people who are capable of this. So, for instance, children or disabled people. Feminist has also tried to challenge virtue ethics as well, but I'll not go into more details of those challenges, so you can pause and read the slides. Feminist ethicists also critique false universalization, where some feminists are accused of assuming universal categories for women or speaking for all women. Absolutism is ethical theory, prioritizing rigorous application of principles regardless of context or individual motivations. And this is criticized for overlooking particularities. For instance, they may fail to recognize the particular characteristics, diverse lived experiences, and contexts of different individuals. Feminist ethicists who believe in universal human rights face criticism for potentially promoting absolutism, that they may be prescribing solutions without considering the diverse perspectives of women in different contexts, places, and social situations. In response to absolutism and universalism, most feminist ethicist scholars call us to see that moral contexts change with different situated and gendered agents. They encourage us to recognize the testimonies and perspectives of situated agents and be aware of the power and political relationships underlying moral encounters. They inspire us to see the vulnerabilities of different individuals and their agencies shaped by experiences with oppression. We need to start to recognize all these things we used to overlook and work our way to diverse approaches to ethics from here. For some feminist ethicists, feminist ethics really isn't a theory or a set of theories, but a way to do ethics and philosophy, a way to think and perceive. Let's move on to Marxism and the potential of a Marxist ethic. So, for Marxism, a very central idea is ownership of the means of production. So, Marx argued that the capitalist system is built on the private ownership of production resources, such as factories, land, and tools, which are essential for creating goods. According to Marx, capitalists control these resources and, by extension, the lives of workers who must sell their labor to survive. So they were forced to starve. Marx didn't reject business enterprise outright, so unlike a lot of people might imagine or perceive or assume. So Marx rejects capitalism's structure, so how capitalists exploit workers and perpetuate class divisions. So he believed that the system inherently alienates workers, reducing them to mere instruments of production rather than fully realized human beings. So this is a form of exploitation where the value of a worker's labor is taken by capitalists for their own profit. Alienation is a very central concept for Marxism and also products they create, so they don't own them and they don't see the full value of their labor. There is also alienation from the process, so workers don't control their work processes, they are controlled by the needs of capital. There is alienation from other workers. The competitive nature of capitalism undermines cooperation and solidarity between workers. There is also alienation from themselves. So finally, workers are alienated from their own creative potential because they are reduced to mere cogs in the capitalist machine. So at this point, we can probably summarize the core of Marx's arguments. So Marx argues that workers are exploited. They are forced to sell their labor, but the value of what they produce exceeds the wages they are paid. So there is this difference. So this difference is called surplus value. Is This difference is appropriated by capitalists who benefit from the work's labor without offering equivalent compensation. So Marx didn't like the idea of rights in some readings. However, Marx didn't reject all rights. Rather, he critiqued rights as they were framed in capitalist societies. So he didn't like capitalist rights. Because Marx thinks that capitalist rights, such as the right to private property, serve to protect the capitalist class and perpetuate inequality. So Marx argues that capitalist rights of man are nothing more than egoistic rights that protect individual property and freedom at the expense of collective well-being. So he argues that we should not abandon rights, but go for collective rights. So we should prioritize the welfare of all individuals, not just the wealthy few. So for instance, the right to not be exploited. So if Marx was trying to do business ethics, he would think that business ethics under capitalism is deeply flawed. So he would probably construct an ethics that's concerned with justice. And in his view, justice probably requires that people not be used as mere tools to serve others' interests. So he would argue something like, under capitalism, businesses operate in a way that undermines human flourishing. So a Marxist ethics of business would require businesses to operate in a way that respects workers as autonomous beings, providing fair compensation, ensuring democratic participation in decision-making, and addressing the exploitation and alienation that workers experience. Workers often lack freedom of choice due to the overwhelming coercion of the capitalist system, as Marx recognizes. So this probably kind of calls us to revisit the role of responsibility, punishment, and compensation placed in our business ethics. So Marx probably would argue for something like individuals should not be punished for actions taken under economic duress. So Marx probably would also argue that those who exploit others should be accountable. So punishment should be reserved for those whose actions actively harm others. But in the context of capitalism, much of the harm is systematic. So Marx argues that we should move to a new kind of ethics of responsibility, punishment, and compensation, and address this kind of systematic harm. So a Marxist ethics probably would also include content about and requires about environmental responsibility. So, as in his work, Marx critiqued the capitalist system for commodifying everything, including the natural world. So basically, the capitalists took nature as a resource to be exploited for profit, with not much regard for long-term sustainability or the environmental costs of production. So Marx would probably construct a ethics that requires businesses to take collective responsibility for the environment. So they should prioritize sustainable practices, reduce environmental harm, and so on and so forth. And maybe if they do not do that, burden of blame and change and improvement should be put on them. Punishment probably should be put on them. We've roughly sketched the kind of Marxist ethics. So I also want to briefly talk about the other framework that's called humanistic psychology. Also, although that is a psychology framework, it does make a lot of assumptions about humans, and it does focus a lot on the nature of humans and the nature of human development and kind of like how we live and how we relate to the world. And all the humanistic psychology is itself a therapeutic and psychological framework. Those assumptions about who humans are and how humans live actually can be used to construct an ethics. So I kind of treat it as an ethical framework as well. So I'll quickly go through the basic assumptions to give you like a rough idea of the assumptions. So what humanistic psychology thinks humans are. So firstly, they think that humans are fundamentally good and growth oriented. So they believe that humans have an innate drive for personal growth and self improvement. So Carl Rogers talk about actualizing tendency, and Maslow talks about self-actualization. So we'll talk about Maslow a little bit more in a bit. The second assumption is that humans possess free will and personal agency. So humanistic psychologists emphasize personal responsibility and free will as defining features of human nature. Humanistic psychology also assumes that what is central about living as a human is subjective experience. So they value the individual subjective experience as the primary way to understand human nature. They think that experience is unique to each person and must be respected as valid and authentic. Humanistic and existential psychologists recognize that humans face existential challenges such as death, freedom, isolation, and meaninglessness. So Rowe emphasized the tension between anxiety and creativity, arguing that confronting anxiety leads to growth. So she argues that anxiety is the experience of growth itself. So as you can see, a lot of these might actually be related to workspace, to the employment and employee relationship, and also to like the well-being and experiences of employees, and how should we view employees, and how should we kind of create a work environment for employees. Humanist psychology argues that humans are social beings and seek connection. So humanists acknowledge the fundamental importance of relationships, empathy, and social connections. So Rogers viewed human relationships as crucial to growth, particularly in the therapeutic context, where the therapist provides unconditional positive regard, empathy, and congruence. So Rogers wrote that when I can accept myself just as I am, then I can change. So if we kind of adopt this kind of assumption, so we can build corporate frameworks and also institution, organizations, and businesses that value human connections and value humans as social beings and promote positive regard, empathy, and things that really foster healthy, positive human relationships that are crucial to growth, which would in turn help. So as it helps the employees to grow, it would in turn help the growth of the business and the development of the organization. So which will probably produce more benefits and lead to things like higher efficiency and better reputation, better well-being of the business or organization. One question we can think about is how humanistic psychology can be used to analyze cases in the business context and to kind of inform business ethical decision making and also help us to construct business ethics frameworks and decision making models that's kind of grounded in and incorporates humanistic psychology. So I guess there is a lot of potential and possibilities. I guess you can probably think out of a lot more. It can also be combined with pure ethics, feminist ethics, Marxist ethics, and probably the ontology, and thus further lead us to a unique, powerful business ethics framework. So one practical kind of potential I would probably suggest here would be Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So this has been applied in business ethics and management contexts a lot as well. So this graph on the right hand side, it has been used in HR management and to talk about workers' rights and so on and so forth, and also about like workspace ethics and workspace bullying and also like corporate culture, so on and so forth. This has also been used in like managing the training and education of employees, and thus management of long-term development and well-being of a business. So I think that's all the ethical frameworks for this class. So in the next week. So we'll move on to more like specifically business and more kind of like scientific or social scientific concepts and works. And a lot of these things that we are starting to cover in the next few units, actually you can see traces and assumptions that actually are obtained from the moral philosophies we've covered in those units before this point. And you can also think about how those moral philosophies might guide us to evaluate and think about those concepts, theories, models we're going to cover starting from now. So thank you so much for today, and see you in the next lecture.